My name is Jayant Bhandari, and I have been organizing this philosophical gathering of great minds for the last 5 years. Every speaker who comes to this podium is a personal hero of mine. They have taught me something very fundamental, something with a very high leverage, something that has had a very positive effect on my own life. And I hope, as it happened with a lot of participants here in the past, you would go back getting some new insights and getting to think about something that will have a major influence on your life. Our first speaker is Lawrence Reed. 5 years back, Lawrence inaugurated the first Capitalism and Morality seminar. He is the president of Foundation for Economic Education and author of a new book, A Republic, If We Can Keep It. That pretty much could have been the alternative title of this seminar for this year, I guess. What has inspired me about Lawrence for a very long time is his emphasis on culture and moral values. And I think truly as the morality and culture of the Western countries is deteriorating, their freedoms and liberties are going away as well. I don't blame so much on the government because I think they are mostly a symptom of the problem that is mostly within the culture. Lawrence will talk about the lessons that we can learn from ancient Rome and its modern parallels. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lawrence Reed.
Thank you very much, Giant, and ladies and gentlemen. I think in 40 years of public speaking, I've never given a speech sitting down before. And I hope this isn't the start of something. But so I must apologize for that, but I've had for almost 2 weeks now an excruciating attack of sciatica from the lower back down my left leg, and no doctor so far has been able to really fix it in the 2 weeks that I've struggled with it. So I am full of painkillers this morning, but as excited as ever to be here. But it also has affected the style of presentation that I want to give you. I normally lecture from an outline or even from memory, but I've prepared a text for this occasion because you never know how these painkillers will affect your memory. So this way I've got it right. Which reminds me of a joke about memory. There was a very elderly gentleman whose memory wasn't as good as it used to be, and he got it in his mind that he was going to ask this very elderly lady friend of his to marry him. And so one evening he saw her at an event and popped a question, and he went home on cloud 9. But when he woke up the next morning, he realized that he had forgotten what she said. So he had to work up the courage to give her a call. Finally did, and got her on the phone, and he said, "Myrtle, I'm so embarrassed to have to admit this. I know I asked you last night to marry me, but I have forgotten what you said." And her reply was, "I'm so glad you called. I knew somebody had asked me, and I couldn't remember who it was." So there's a match made in heaven, huh? How many of you are on Facebook? What's that? Oh, she did say yes. That's why he was on cloud 9 the night before. But how many of you are on Facebook? Okay, great. Am I connected with any of you? Well, great. I'm in an ongoing contest with one of our speakers, Jeff Tucker, an old friend, and I want to stay way ahead of him. So I invite you to like my page, but even more importantly, I hope you'll visit the Foundation for Economic Education's Facebook page, but more importantly than that, our website, fee.org. Among the things you can get there, even read in its entirety there, is a little book I intended to bring for all of you, but it's sitting on my garage floor, unfortunately, except for these two copies. But it's called Are We Good Enough for Liberty? If you go to our website and find that, you'll discover you can request up to 20 copies at no charge. We'll be happy to send it to you. We think it is going to be a powerful tool in making new converts to ideas of liberty. And the reason is, in very short and simple fashion, it makes the connection between liberty and character in a way that I think many people find inspiring. And as you'll see by the end of this talk, I think that unless and until we're able to make that connection clear in the public mind, we may have only short-term successes on the road to restoring our liberty. So I hope you'll get a copy of this, or 20 copies, and we'll be happy to send those to you. Are we good enough for liberty? Well, I want to open by sharing with you a quote from a Roman historian who wrote this 2,000 years ago. His name was Livy. There is an exceptionally beneficial and fruitful advantage to be derived from the study of the past. There you see, set in the clear light of historical truth, examples of every possible type. From these you can select for yourself and for your country what to imitate, and also what, as being mischievous in its inception and disastrous in its consequences, you should avoid. Keep that in mind as we talk about the rise and fall of one of history's greatest civilizations, ancient Rome. The history of ancient Rome spans about 1,000 years, roughly 500 as a republic and 500 as an imperial autocracy. And the birth of Christ occurs approximately right in the middle. The closest parallels between Roman and Western civilizations, American and Canadian civilizations, I think today, are to be found in Rome's first half millennia as a republic. You hear a lot from historians comparing the latter years of ancient Rome, the imperial autocracy, the emperors, with the current history. But I think the parallels are more striking when you look at its first 500 years as a republic and how that period compares to our recent experience. We in our day can derive the most instructive lessons from that period of the Roman Republic. The tyranny of the empire came after the republic was destroyed. And that's the awful consequence of decay that places like America hopefully can yet avoid. Both Rome and America were born in revolt against monarchy. Americans against the British, and Romans against the rule of the Etruscans. Wary of concentrated authority, both established republics with checks and balances, separation of powers, and protection of certain rights of at least many people, if not all. Despite shortcomings, the establishment of the Roman Republic in the 6th century BC and the American Republic in the 18th century AD represented the greatest advances for individual liberty in the history of the world. Unparalleled prosperity and influence resulted in both cases. Upon winning their freedom, Romans split the top position of power between two men, known as consuls. One was to be a check upon the other, and neither, except in emergency situations, was to serve more than 1 year. Term limits. Legislative bodies, the Senate and assemblies of elected representatives were established. Incidentally, the Senate was retained in name, though not in power, for the entire 1,000 years of ancient Roman history. Even as freedom vanished, the later tyrants couldn't quite bring themselves to abolish the symbols of republicanism, so they kept the Senate, which suggests to me that even if America ever loses its republic, it wouldn't be surprising if it kept its House and Senate. As in the case of Rome, our legislative bodies may even formally ratify the final extinction of the freedom they've been voting against for decades. Let me share with you what I call the 3 most stubborn lessons of history. The first one, no people, and I know of no exception, no people who lost their character kept their liberties. Number two, power that is, and I'll return to each of these in some detail, power that is shackled and dispersed is preferable to power that is unrestrained and centralized. And the third, the here and now, or the present, is rarely as important as tomorrow. Now to the first of the three, no people who lost their character kept their liberties. Character, as I'm using the term, embodies the trait of virtue, which is from the Latin term virtus, meaning courageous honesty. Above all, it was esteemed by the early Romans of the Republic. It was routinely taught in the home by mothers and fathers. Indeed, all formal education took place in the home in the first 2.5 centuries of the Republic. Schools didn't appear until the 3rd century BC, and even they did not receive government funding until well after the Republic faded. The Greeks used to look down on the Romans for this homeschooling norm. They used to think, oh, what's wrong with the Romans? You know, we have schools, they do it all in their home. And they thought that was somehow inferior. But of course, we know they didn't last very long, did they? I guess the lesson there is that government funding is not necessary for the decline of civilization, but it can sure help. Other traits of character stressed in early Rome, and from whom we get memorable terms of vocabulary, were gravitas, meaning dignity, continentia, which meant self-discipline, industria, or diligence, benevolentia, which was goodwill, pietas, loyalty, the sense of duty, and simplicitas, candor. These are the values, among others, that were stressed in Roman homes during the early period of the Republic. The connection between character and liberty, I believe, is powerful. Liberty, by which I mean an environment of the rule of law, respect for, and the protection of lives and rights and property and contracts. That's the only social arrangement that requires character when you think about it. You could be a scumbag and get by just fine in any socialized environment, because all socialism ever asks for you, from you, is that you keep quiet and cough up your taxes and go give your life when the state so directs. You can otherwise be a scumbag and fit right in. But under liberty, if you're to have it, if society at large is to have it, people in great numbers must be people of solid character. And if they lose that character, they will lose their freedoms. The absence of character produces chaos and tyranny. Its presence is what makes liberty possible. And it goes in both directions, too. Not only is character necessary to have liberty, liberty is necessary to have character, because if you're not free, you're not able to make the choices that allow you to exercise your character, to choose right from wrong, and to mold your life according to the values that character represents. Rome rose from nothing and sustained itself as a great entity for centuries because of its strong character. When Romans allowed the temptations of the welfare state to erode their character, when they abandoned responsibility, self-discipline, self-reliance, and respect for the property of others, when they began to use government to rob Peter to pay Paul, they turned down a fateful and destructive path. In the waning years of the Republic, in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, a rogue named Claudius ran for the office of tribune. He bribed the electorate with promises of free grain at taxpayer expense, and he won. And thereafter, Romans in growing numbers embraced the notion that voting for a living could be more lucrative than working for one. Candidates for Roman office spent huge sums to win public favor, and then plundered the population afterwards to make good on their promises to the greedy mob that elected them. As the Republic gave way to dictatorship, a succession of emperors built their power on the handouts they controlled. Nearly a third of the city of Rome received public relief payments by the time of Christ. The historian H.J. Haskell describes this tragic turn of ideas and events. Listen to what he says in this passage. Less than a century after the Republic had faded into the autocracy of the empire, the people had lost all taste for Republican institutions. On the death of an emperor, the Senate debated the question of whether or not to restore the Republic, but the Commons preferred the rule of an extravagant despot who would continue the dole and furnish them free shows. The mob outside clamored for one ruler of the world. It's frightening to consider, isn't it, how easily a sturdy people, when they let their guard and their character down, can be bought and paid for by the welfare state. And once they sell themselves for that mess of pottage from politicians, it's not impossible to turn back, but it's not easy either. Now to the second lesson. Power that is shackled and dispersed is preferable to power that is unrestrained and centralized. Just like Americans 2,500 years later, Romans got it right when they determined at their nation's birth that concentrated power was the main problem of governance and the source of endless other problems. They and Americans once understood the wisdom of Lord Acton's famous admonition, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I always like to add my own corollary to that. Power attracts the already corrupted. Power concentrates because that's what power does. That's what power does if the people are not vigilant. In Rome, cities and provinces lost their independence to the central government after demanding funds from that government to bail them out of financial difficulty. Ring a bell? The greatest of all Roman historians, Tacitus, noted how freedom was undermined when the focus of Roman legislation changed from the security and good of all to the satisfaction of particular interest groups and individuals. In his words, quote, this is 2,000 years ago, and now bills were passed, not for national objects, but for individual cases, and laws were most numerous when the Commonwealth was most corrupt. In 33 AD, a financial panic gripped Rome. The government responded by a massive issuance of zero-interest credit. Does that ring a bell? Yes. Businesses that happily took the bait found themselves later thoroughly ensnared. After all, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Roman leaders increasingly sought power not only against their own people, but over others as well. They embarked upon one foreign adventure after another. At first, these adventures were for the security of Rome and arguably defensible in many cases, but later they were often for the sake of domination or plunder. Add the costs of empire to the costs of a welfare state, and eventually bills come due that even the most power-mad tax collector cannot pay without cheating the people of a sound currency. The Emperor Nero, and you know why he's famous, the famous line, Nero fiddled while Rome burnt. We don't know for sure, but we suspect that either he ordered the destruction of a portion of Rome, maybe set fire to it himself, because he had a grander design for that part of town. But he is reported by Gaius Suetonius, a Roman historian, as having once rubbed his hands together and declared, let us tax again, let us tax until no one owns anything. He was also, by the way, the first of the Roman emperors to debase the Roman coin by reducing its silver content. Before that, as the Roman state grew, if they needed more money, they either raised taxes or sent the soldiers to dig a little deeper in the silver mines. But it was under Nero they thought, hey, we don't have to do that. We can just melt down the coin, mix in cheaper junk metals, have a larger mass of metal to make more coins from. That means the silver content will go down, but we can make a lot of coins this way, and it doesn't cost very much at all. He was the first to do that, and it went on for several centuries. Power is an exceedingly dangerous thing in the hands of any government. This popular quote, often attributed to George Washington, though it's not ever been actually verified, nonetheless sounds like something that almost any of America's founders could have said or would have agreed with. Quote, "Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. And like fire, it can be either a dangerous servant or a fearful master." Think about that. The suggestion there is that even if it does what it's supposed to do, even if it's tiny and devoted to defense against violence by its very nature, it's still dangerous. Even if it's a servant, it's a dangerous thing. You can't wind it up and walk away from it. Now to the third lesson. The here and now, or the present, is rarely as important as tomorrow. Early Romans, as I believe with early Americans, built and planned and lived for the future. You see this throughout Roman literature. They sacrificed present gratification so the future would be better. Then there came a time in both ancient Rome and in our society when living for the moment ruled the day. The feeling was, get what you can now, regardless of the cost or who pays for it or how untenable a situation it may cause for you or others tomorrow. If problems arise, some future generation will figure it out after we're gone. Doesn't that describe an awful lot of the welfare state in any country? You know, wind it up today, it's going to do good things for this or that group, but hey, if it causes problems later, we'll be gone. Somebody else will figure that out. And before you know it, you got a $17 trillion national debt and half the public dependent upon more. We've heard a lot of talk in recent years in America, and I think probably here too, that certain companies are, quote, too big to fail. But in dealing with that imaginary short-term problem, we've handed huge chunks of our lives and our economy over to a government that is arguably too big to succeed. Rome did precisely the same thing. Live for the moment, damn the future, après moi le déluge, as the French say. You might ask, was there a reason why I've spent more time so far on that first lesson than I did on the second and the third? And there is. Character is the key. It's everything. Little of value is possible without it, and there's hardly any better use of time than to study men and women who possess it or possessed it in copious quantities. And now I want to tell you about one such person. He's relevant to our story because of where he came from. But first, I have a question for you. Have you ever thought, if you could go back in time and spend 1 hour in conversation with 10 people, any 10 people of your choosing, each one separately and privately, who would you pick? That's an exercise perhaps for later, but I encourage you to think about that, because who you pick will say an awful lot about things like your values, your interests, and many other factors, I think. My list isn't the same from one day to the next, but at least a couple names are always on it, without fail. And one of them is Marcus Tullius Cicero. He was the greatest citizen of the greatest ancient civilization, ancient Rome. He was its most eloquent orator and its most distinguished man of letters. He was elected to its highest office, as well as most of the lesser ones that were of any importance. More than anyone else, he introduced to Rome the best of the ideas of the Greeks. And rejected the bad ones. More of his written and spoken work survives to this day. This is a remarkable point. More of his written and spoken work survives to this day, including hundreds of speeches and letters, than that of any other historical figure who lived before 1000 AD. Most importantly, he gave his life for peace and liberty as the greatest defender of the Roman Republic before it plunged into the darkness of a welfare warfare state. Cato Institute scholar Jim Powell opened his remarkable book, The Triumph of Liberty, a 2,000-year history told through the lives of freedom's greatest champions, with a chapter on this Roman hero, a chapter he closed with this fitting tribute, quote, Cicero urged people to reason together. He championed decency and peace, and he gave the modern world some of the most fundamental ideas of liberty. At a time when speaking freely was dangerous, he courageously denounced tyranny. He helped keep the torch of liberty burning bright for more than 2,000 years. Now, even before I tell you anything else about him, who wouldn't want to spend an hour with this man? Marcus Tullius Cicero was born in 106 BC in the small town of Arpinum, about 60 miles southeast of Rome. He began practicing law in his early 20s. His most celebrated case, which he won, required him to defend a man accused of murdering his father. He secured an acquittal by convincing the jury that the real murderers were closely aligned to the highest public officials in Rome. It was the first, but not the last time, that he put himself in grave danger for what he believed to be right. Roman voters rewarded Cicero with victory in one office after another. I don't believe he ever lost an election, as a matter of fact. And he worked his way up the ladder of government to the very top. Along the way, the patrician nobility of Rome never quite embraced him because he hailed from a slightly more humble class, the so-called equestrian order of merchants. He reached the pinnacle of office in 63 BC when, at the age of 43, Romans elected him to the highest office, consul, along with his fellow co-consul, since there were two of those. The consulship was the Republic's highest office, and though authority in the Roman constitution was shared between two co-equal consuls. One could veto the decisions of the other, and both were limited to a single one-year term. I love term limits. Just to digress for a moment, you know who was the best exemplar of term limits in American presidential history? William Henry Harrison. He had it right. He caught cold on Inauguration Day and died in a month before he could ever do any harm. So, Cicero's co-consul, Gaius Antonius Hybridet, was so overshadowed by his colleague's eloquence and magnetism that he's but a footnote today. In contrast, Cicero emerged as the savior of the Republic, at least for a time, amid a spectacular plot to snuff it out. The ringleader of this vast conspiracy to end the Roman Republic was a senator named Lucius Sergius, anyone know as Cataline, and known as Cataline today. This disgruntled, power-hungry Roman assembled an extensive network of fellow travelers, including some fellow senators. The plan was to ignite a general insurrection across Italy, march on Rome with the aid of mercenaries, assassinate Cicero and his co-consul, seize power, and crush all opposition. Cicero learned of the plot and quietly conducted his own investigations. Then, in a series of 4 powerful orations before the Senate, with Cataline himself present for the first, he cut loose. The great orator mesmerized the Senate by divulging the plot with these opening lines and the blistering indictment that followed. He said, "How long, O Cataline, will you abuse our patience? And for how long will that madness of yours mock us? To what end will your unbridled audacity hurl itself?" Before Cicero was finished, Cataline fled the Senate. He rallied his dwindling army, but was ultimately killed in battle. Other top conspirators were exposed and executed. Cicero, on whom the Senate had conferred emergency power, walked away from that power and restored the Republic. He was given the honorary title of Pater Patriae, father of the country. But Rome at the time of Cataline's conspiracy was not the Rome of 2 or 3 centuries before, when honor and virtue and character were the watchwords of Roman life. By Cicero's time, the place was rife with corruption and power lust. The outward appearances of a republic were undermined daily by civil strife and a growing welfare warfare state. Many who gave lip service in public to Republican values were privately conniving to secure power or wealth through the political process and their connections. Others were corrupted or bribed into silence by government handouts. The Republic was on life support, and Cicero's voice was soon to be drowned out by a rising tide of political intrigue and violence and popular apathy. In 60 BC, 3 years after his year as consul, in which he snuffed out the Catalinarian conspiracy, or Cicero did, Julius Caesar, then a senator and military general with boundless ambition, tried to get Cicero to join a powerful partnership that became known as the First Triumvirate. But Cicero's Republican sentiments prompted him to reject the offer. Yet another opportunity to seize great power that Cicero rejected. 2 years later, and barely 5 years after crushing Cataline's conspiracy, Cicero found himself on the wrong side of senatorial intrigue. Political opponents connived to thwart his influence, resulting in a brief exile to northern Greece. He returned, however, to a hero's welcome, then retired to his writing. Over the next decade or so, he gifted the world with impressive literary and philosophical work. One of my favorites being, and you can still get it in print, De Officious, or On Duties. Here's my favorite passage from Cicero's De Officious. Quote, "The chief purpose in the establishment of states and constitutional orders is that individual property rights might be secured. It is the peculiar function of state and city to guarantee to every man the free and undisturbed control of his own property." This is 2,000 years ago. Politics, however, would not leave Cicero alone. He would have preferred to continue writing and speaking. But rivalry between Caesar and another leading political figure in general, Pompey, exploded in a civil war. Cicero reluctantly sided with the latter, Pompey, whom he regarded as the lesser of two evils and less dangerous to the Republic. But Caesar triumphed over Pompey, who was killed in Egypt, and then cowed the Senate into naming him dictator for life. A month later, Caesar was assassinated in the Senate by pro-Republican forces. When Mark Antony attempted to succeed Caesar as dictator, it was Cicero who spearheaded the Republican cause once again, delivering a series of 14 powerful speeches known in history as the Philippics. Cicero's oratory never soared higher. With the remnants of the Republic hanging by a thread, he threw the scroll at Antony. The would-be dictator, Cicero declared, was nothing but a bloodthirsty tyrant in waiting. In the Senate, Cicero said this, "I fought for the Republic when I was young. I shall not abandon her in my old age. I scorned the daggers of Cataline. I shall not tremble before yours. Rather, I would willingly expose my body to them if by my death the liberty of the nation could be recovered, and the agony of the Roman people could at last bring to birth that which it has been so long in labor." Antony and his fellow conspirators named Cicero an enemy of the state. They sent the assassin Herennius to take him out. On the 7th of December, 43 BC, the killer found his target. The great statesman bared his neck and faced his assailant with these last words, quote, "There is nothing proper about what you're doing, soldier, but do try to kill me properly." With one sword stroke to the neck, the life of the last major obstacle to dictatorship was extinguished. At that moment, the 500-year-old republic expired too, to be replaced by the imperial autocracy of the emperors. Roman liberty was gone. On the orders of Antony, Cicero's hands were severed and nailed along with his head to the speaker's platform in the Forum. Antony's wife personally pulled out Cicero's tongue and, in a rage against his oratory, stabbed it repeatedly with her hairpin. Jim Powell reports in his book, The Triumph of Liberty, that a century after the ghastly deed, the Roman writer Quintilian declared that Cicero was, quote, the name not of a man, but of eloquence itself. 13 centuries later, when the printing press was invented, the first book it produced was the Gutenberg Bible, but the second was Cicero's dissertation on duties. 3 more centuries passed when Thomas Jefferson called Cicero the first master of the world. And John Adams proclaimed that, quote, all the ages of the world have not produced a greater statesman and philosopher than Marcus Tullius Cicero. Some might say that Cicero's labors to save the Roman Republic were, at least in hindsight, a waste of time. He gave his life for an ideal that he was able to extend tenuously for maybe a couple of decades. But if I had an hour with Cicero, I would thank him. I would want him to know of the inspiration he remains to lovers of liberty everywhere more than 2 millennia after he lived. I would share with him one of my favorite remarks about heroism from the screenwriter and film producer Joss Whedon. Quote, the thing about a hero is even when it doesn't look like there's light at the end of the tunnel, he's going to keep digging. He's going to keep trying to do what's right and make up for what's gone before, just because that's who he is. And that is exactly who Cicero was. Do we citizens of free countries of 2014 have the character to preserve our liberties as Cicero strives so hard to achieve? That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? By almost any measure, the standards that we as citizens keep and expect of those we elect have slipped badly in recent years. Have you heard about the senator from Montana, John Walsh, in the last few days, who it turns out plagiarized significant portions of his dissertation at the U.S. Army War College? And when this was brought to his attention this past week, you know what his reaction was? I didn't do anything wrong. It's plainly evident that he did, and faced with the evidence, he denies it while expecting re-election in November. And the sad thing is, somebody's going to vote for that guy. He might even win. A society of people of solid character would write him off in an instant. By almost any measure, our standards have slipped. Though everybody complains about politicians who pander, perhaps they do it because we are an increasingly panderable people. Too many are willing to look the other way when politicians misbehave, as long as they're of the right party or deliver the goods that we personally claim. Our celebrity-drenched culture focuses incessantly on the vapid and the irresponsible. Our role models would make our grandparents cringe. We cut corners and sacrifice character all the time for power, money, attention, or other ephemeral gratifications. Our Constitution is skirted, misinterpreted, and all but ignored by our highest authorities, and plenty of people don't seem to care. Bad character leads to bad policy and bad economics, which is bad for liberty. And without character, a free society is not just unlikely, it's not possible. I will close by asking and then answering an important question. To avoid the fate of the dead and buried Roman Republic, what do places like America and Canada need today? We need more men and women who do not have a price at which they can be bought, who do not borrow from integrity to pay for expediency, who have their priorities straight and in proper order, whose handshake is an ironclad contract, who are not afraid of taking risks to advance what is right, who are honest in matters both large and small, who treat the rights and property of others as they expect others should regard theirs. We need more men and women whose ambitions are big enough to include others, who know how to win with grace and lose with dignity, who do not believe that shrewdness and cunning and ruthlessness are the three keys to success. Who still have friends that they made 20 years ago. Who put principle and consistency above politics or personal advancement. And who are not afraid to go against the grain of popular opinion. Who regard their own self-reliance and responsibility as infinitely more sacred than any handout from the government. We need more men and women who do not forsake what is right just to get consensus because it makes them look good. Who know how important it is to lead by example, not by barking orders. Who would not have you do something they would not do themselves. Who work to turn even the most adverse circumstances into opportunities to learn and to improve. Who truly love liberty and are eager to give more than lip service to it. And who love even those who have done some injustice or unfairness to them. We need, in other words, more men and women of character. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. Thank you. Be happy to take some questions. Yes, sir.
How do we increase the percentage of people with character and decrease the percentage of people with lack of character?
Great question. How do we increase the percentage of those with character and decrease the percentage of those without? First and foremost, you remember this principle. You cannot impart what you don't possess. So if you want to be an exemplar or a spokesperson for character, once you know how critically important it is, you've got to practice it yourself. And character really is a lifelong exercise. You never get to the end of the line where you can say it's as good as it's going to get. It ought to be something you work on and try to improve, try to fix, and get better at every day of your life. And it's by example, furthermore, that most people really learn. You can lecture at them and tell them you ought to be a better person, but most of the time that falls on deaf ears or engenders some resentment. People learn from the example that you set. So the first step in restoring character is to restore your own, assuming there's room to do so. And my guess is there's not a person here in the room who could say, I'm as good as it can ever be. So work on your own. Then you'll find you're an influence on the people closest to you. Children especially. Kids are better than any people of any age, I think, at smelling a hypocrite, aren't they? They know, and it bugs them when parents say one thing and do another. So it's essentially important in molding the character of young people that you live what you preach and be a good example to them. Now, from there are a lot of other things you can do. Make sure that what you do in the public arena, such as a voter, reflects your character. If you live in Montana, don't vote for John Walsh. Don't reward politicians of rotten character with re-election. And if the choices at the polls sometime may be nothing better than between Scarface and Machine Gun Kelly, don't feel as though you have to waste your vote on the lesser of the two evils. Vote for neither one. Don't sanctify the lack of character by ever casting a vote for it. Now, in other ways, how can you teach character? At FEE, this is a critical component in the seminars that we do for young people. We look for ways to work it into our message. And we find that the younger the person you're trying to influence, the more you've got to rely upon stories. They don't want to hear endless lectures, endless moralizing about why you've got to be a better person. What resonates with them, and maybe most people of any age, are stories of real people who actually lived it, practiced it, and as a result were of great consequence in the course of history. So we're storytellers at Rome. I only told you a story of one, Cicero here, but I love to talk about others who sort of lift us up just by listening to the story of their lives. We don't do that often enough. Read biographies of great men and women who exemplify character in accordance with the principles of a free society. And when you see the lack of character, whether it be in the textbooks your kids are using in the classroom or wherever, speak up about it. Don't let it by. Don't give it an endorsement by your inaction or your silence. Let people know that this thing called character means everything. Civilization rises or falls on it. That's how important it is. So you got to live it, you got to practice it, you got to teach it, support those who are trying to incorporate it in their message. Just look around and ask yourself, what can I do today, given my resources, my talents, my interests, my circumstances, what can I do to be a better example and maybe to teach a principle of character to somebody else? You can also email me and I'll send you a list of good books to read if you are like to be inspired by great stories of solid character. So that's how I'd answer that, I guess. There's no button I can push that says, we all push that, we'll be people of better character. It's a time-consuming process, but it's worth every effort.
Can I follow up with what percentage of people with good character do we need in order to restore our republic?
Oh, what percentage do we need to restore the republic? I don't know. I don't know anybody that knows the answer to that. It may be smaller than you think.
It would appear that 51% would be a good number.
Oh, yeah, and 71 would even be better. But I think the power of example is so strong that even a corrupted society can be turned around by the solid virtue of a small but vocal and active minority. That's happened in history many times. So, for instance, if you're wondering, are we at the point where maybe we're so far below that needed percentage that the battle's over, I would caution you, don't be pessimistic, be optimistic. We can turn things around on a dime sometimes, and then later when that happens, we look back and say, how'd that happen? And we discover it was because, though we didn't notice it, there were some good people working for what they knew was right, in spite of all the obstacles, and they're the ones that led the way. So one of the great virtues of character, I think, is optimism. So don't worry about what that percentage may be. Just work to make it bigger, whatever it is. And I think you can be amazed at how much can be accomplished by so few, if you got the right ideas behind them. Yes, ma'am.
Have you been able to get into any of the school situations and start talking about curriculum improvements to stress this form of morality and difference in what they're probably living in?
Yes.
Is there any way?
Yes, we've had some really exciting successes. I'll give you a couple. In the city of Detroit, now, in America, is there any other city that's gone further down the wrong path than that one has? I don't think so. They have less than half the population they did 40 years ago. Nobody of any market-friendly persuasion has been elected to any position in Detroit in half a century. The statists have been in charge of everything, sky-high taxes, massive bureaucracy, powerful labor unions, handouts from Lansing and Washington. It ought to be a statist paradise, right? Everything the statists work for in a country or state or a city, they've had it all in Detroit. And what is it? A total disaster. But the seeds are being sown for what may yet be a remarkable turnaround. We work closely with a professor at Florida State named Jim Gortney. How many of you have heard of him? He wrote Common Sense Economics, great free market economist. Well, he's written this Common Sense Economics, a version of it, for roughly 10th graders with a full-blown curriculum for the teacher, tests and video accompaniments. The whole thing makes it easy for them. And just this last February, would you believe, this is the biggest success we've had with this. Even though the focus is economics, we weave in to the curriculum a lot of these other values and entrepreneurship and what have you. Totally different perspective than the kids have been getting in the public school system. We got the Detroit public school system to agree to adopt that text for at least the next 3 years for every 10th grader in the city in economics, and it's required at the 10th grade level. Every semester there'll be every year, 4,000 10th graders in Detroit learning over the course of a semester from this great textbook. You might say, well, what about the teachers who may be hostile? Some are, but the curriculum is provided them, so an awful lot of them say, gee, why do I want to do anything different? It's all made easy for me here, including videos, so I don't have to teach. So yeah, there'll be a little hostility, and there has been, but by and large, these kids in Detroit, of all places, are having their eyes opened to things like entrepreneurship and personal character and working hard and saving money and not relying upon the government. That's revolutionary in Detroit. One semester of that so far already in place. The demand for our programs have gone through the roof. When I took over FEE in 2008, we had like 3 or 4 summer seminars getting 30, 40 kids apiece. And we took almost everybody that applied. Today, we're getting more than 2,000 applications, and we're accepting over 800. And we have 12 seminars. That's just during the summer. We reach about 14,000 face-to-face, last year anyway, and face-to-face presentations around the country and abroad. And when you add in what we reach in the way of web interaction, it's something like 1.5 million last year, which for us is just off the charts. So there's a hunger out there for these ideas. We just have to look for clever, better, engaging ways. And when you focus on young people, that's a new focus for us, by the way. We've decided that's our niche. And not just young people who are already sold on these ideas because maybe their parents convinced them. We focus on kids who haven't heard the message before, haven't made their minds up, and we try to take them to that aha moment where they say, and you know they're there when they write on their evaluation forms after a seminar, never heard this before. Why didn't I hear this before? I see the world in a whole different way now. That's exciting, and it's happening now by the thousands every year. So, yeah, we've had success. We get a lot of invitations to speak on campuses now and in high schools. So, plenty of rejection and hostility, but not like it used to be.
Have you developed any programs for a lower level in 10th grade? Because I think that area is very ripe from, say, 6th grade on where they could understand it.
Yes.
The concept, have you worked on that area at all?
Well, we haven't ourselves because we want to be specialists at that a little further along. But we are quick to point out those who have. In fact, if you email me at lreed@fee.org, I can connect you with, there's a fellow in Utah that's producing great adaptations of Bastiat's The Law, other great free market classics for grade school kids. And so we love to champion that, let people know about it, but we ourselves are focusing on a little older group.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask later.
Yeah, I'll be here a little while, and then I got to get horizontal to shake this. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.